Hi everyone, it's Henry here, and for this last video of 2024, I wanted to finish off a project I'd already started and just have a bit of fun. So a few weeks ago, I painted up the Death Guard from the new Kill Team starter box, and the other half of that box is a Space Marine kill team called Angels of Death. And for myself, Angels of Death can't really conjure up anything other than the best codex that was ever made. So I decided, right, let's do some models that would have made 12-year-old me really, really happy. So let's paint. So you get a few different Marines in the box, but you can only have 6 in the kill team, so I could get rid of a couple, and I didn't really like the sniper model, so got rid of him. The others I think are pretty cool, and the big one that wasn't going to work was the Captain miniature. So I was allowing myself to completely change one of the minis because I wanted to make it, you know, my kill team, but I wanted to use as much of the box as I could, really, and hopefully just show that, you know, you can, with not a lot of work, you can very much sort of put your own favourite chapter stamp on that set. So dug into my bits box and started to compile pieces that I thought would be good for this project and things that make me happy. So I've got a couple of generations of Horus Heresy Dark Angels heads upgrades. I've got the old set and I've got the newer Mark 6 set. So I put them aside as well as some of the unhelmeted heads because I think they can be really cool. You know, the kill team really does allow you to make every model a hero if you want to, and I think that fits particularly with a lot of takes on Space Marines. You know, I love the heresy idea, and there's tons and tons of them, but there's also that cool idea of, you know, everyone a hero, that type of thing. So once I got those bits together, I liked, it was just a case of assembling the models and doing just a tiny bit of cleaning up here and there, shaving off a few of the sculpted on details, not all of them, but just a few of them. It's just a personal preference. It allows me to put some decals in those areas if I want, or just leave them, you know, blank, just to create a little bit more sort of calm on the miniature in different areas. Quite a few people ask the sandpaper. So I use generally 2000 grit here, sanding sponge by Tamiya. I've got like 1500, 2000 and 2500, I think it is. I just work up from it. You know, I'll scrape a bit off with the blade. Oh, great news, by the way, the lost hobby knife has been recovered. So thanks to all of you who reached out with your suggestions. And in fact, loads of you offering to send me yours. So I really appreciate it. But no, it turned up. So we've got it back. Happy days. But yeah, so I shave it off with a scalpel, sand it down. Then I use the extra thin Tamiya glue to sort of clean all that up and just melt it together. And then I sand that again to show me if there's any areas that I've missed and isn't smooth, and I can just repeat the process. But it's just nice and simple, and all I'm going to do for the basic guys is a head swap. I think it's all that is needed. But for the captain, and I wasn't at this point convinced whether I was going to do a captain or a sergeant, but I knew I wanted a proper Dark Angel-y looking miniature. So I picked up the Inner Circle Companion set, and within that there was a body that I thought was pretty cool, not too busy, just a nice amount of details, and still at this point I felt could have gone either way for sergeant or captain. Yeah, I just couldn't decide really what to do with it. I feel like if you can do captain, you kind of have to go to the nth degree with it, which then, I don't know, does it give you room to play with the others? I'm not sure. We went captain in the end. I really, really wanted that sword from the Heresy Praetor set to work because I think it's really cool, but it is absolutely gigantic. And even on this Primaris model, in the pose I was going for, was just too big. So it was time to remove it, and for that I'm just using a really sharp blade and these side cutters. I would really, really recommend, if you like your kit bashing, to invest in a pair of side cutters. They're different to your clippers that you would just use to remove stuff from sprues and that sort of thing. I mean, use side cutters to remove from sprues if you want as well, but they just provide a much, much sharper, cleaner cut, and can just allow you to remove things much easier, much more cleanly. Which I think is nice. So yeah, it was a simple case to remove the sword hand because I did like the arm. It worked well for the pose I'd gone for with this guy, and then I ended up using a sword from the Raven Wing command set. I thought it was really, really cool. Got a bit of, you know, Wrath of Caliban and stuff on it. And then for the other arm, actually took ages playing around to get the posing right on this one. I finally found a left arm with a pistol, which there aren't tons of in the Marine sets, but I wanted plasma. Like, it's Dark Angels, I've got to have plasma, right? Unfortunately, this one wasn't quite as simple as just clip it off and replace, because you can see the back of the hand, the forearm, has like more of a guard on it that extends over the back of the hand. So this it basically meant I wasn't going to be able to salvage the bolt pistol thing that's in it. That doesn't matter. There's millions of them, and I don't really care. So again, it was just made sure I didn't damage the arm itself. That was the only important thing. So just snip, snip, snip. Never trying to do things in one go, and just remove as much as I can with the side cutters. And then went in with my scalpel and a bit of plastic glue and shoving it together was absolutely fine. These are gaming miniatures. Again, I'm not going for sort of showcase level with any of this. I want to play with these. I'm enjoying Kill Team. I really am. Of course, the other side was that the Space Marine Heroes set that you get in this Kill Team starter box are on quite heavily sculpted bases, and it raises them all up quite a bit. And although I'm going to cover all that detail with modelling sand and stuff later, the height difference meant that actually I couldn't have my captain like a good few mil lower than the other guys, so I just needed to build up a little base for him just to raise his stature slightly. So I've just used a bit of slate and rubble and stuff there. But yeah, as you can see, the main troopers, I've just gone for the Mark 6 upgrade heads, except for the heavy intercessor, in which I've used the older Dark Angels upgrade head. I just felt it was a little bit more heavily armoured. It sort of fit that, whatever that mark is. I think it's all Mark 10, isn't it? Some sort of variance. And then the captain was, as I say, quite a lot more of an involved kitbash, but not a difficult kitbash. He just took a while. He just took a few hours of sitting there and playing around. And I just noticed, actually, when I was doing this spin round, I'd forgot to put a pistol on his back. So I'll glue that on later as well. Maybe he's dual wielding or whatever he wants to do. But yeah, really, really happy with the pose. I think it's pretty cool. Kind of, bit cheesy, bit 90s, heroic posing. And that's what I'm going for with these guys. I want to be a little bit more in your face, a little bit more like I did with the Deathwing miniatures, the Deathwing Terminators I did early on in the year. I went for a sort of an old school inspired paint job, not a direct copy, but very much sort of an homage to that. And something I did in that was do much more stark, light and dark contrast on the miniature, more so than I often do. But actually, whenever I glance over at them, they do stand out really well. So I think for gaming minis, there's definitely a place for that, even though it's not personally my favourite take on painting, minis generally. So I'm looking at here is the miniature prime black underneath my painting lamps. And I'm just looking for the angle I want to present him from and where from that angle the spots of highlights are on the model. Once you sort of had a look at that, and that's your guideline, I'm going to do a pre-shade, so a zenithal highlight essentially, but quite a lot more targeted than a zenithal highlight. A grayscale pre-shade, which means I'm going to use thin down white paint, and I'm going to build that up in layers. Those layers are very, very see-through, so we build up a little bit of sort of grey before we get to pure white. But the difference here to how I normally would pre-shade and pre-highlight is I'm being, as I said, a lot more dramatic. So we have a lot more area of shadow, quite tight areas of highlight, and nowhere near as much of that mid-tone that I would usually put in. Now, I like to use Tamiya whenever I'm doing my pre-shades because I can thin it right the way down so it goes super, super see-through, but I'm still able to maintain good control over it. I use Tamiya XF2, which is the flat version, not the glossy version. It's a solvent-based acrylic paint, so they recommend you use the Tamiya thinners with it, and I'm happy to follow those manufacturers' guidelines. It's always worked for me for the decade plus I've used this. But you can see it's a very, very thin mix I'm spraying there, probably about 4 drops of thinner to paint. I'm spraying at about 25 psi. I'm using a 0.4mm needle and nozzle in my airbrush. So that's what I'm using. You're going to need to adjust for your own setup. But what I would warn you is if you're spraying paint that's this dilute, this thin, and you're close to the model, there is a chance it will spider off. So you need to have a fairly decent control of it. Also, because this is really sped up. I think this is 4 times normal speed. I wanted to leave the whole process in, but it did take like sort of 7 or 8 minutes to do this model. Admittedly, it was the first model I was doing. I got quicker as I was going along, but I'm never trying to do anything in one go. I'm just working around the model, following the shapes that I remembered from when the light was shining on there. So the highlights will always follow the shape of the part of the armour that they are on. I'm just trying to stay nice and tight with it, not trying to do it all in one go. Work my way around, and because the layers are so thin, they're drying very, very quickly. So by the time we've done the front, the back is all dry, and ready to go again. But there's just no need to rush. And as long as it makes sense on the model itself, I'm not worrying about realism. I just need the light to make sense on the miniature. So, you know, we haven't got a dramatic shade from one side and then completely opposite direction on the other one. So you can see here what I'm on about with that quite big jump between the areas of shadow and highlight. Actually, on the Captain model here, I fell into old habits and went a little bit more subtle. I think I still got away with it, but a lot more how I would usually do it. But this was, you know, one of the longest stages of the whole paint job, but that was okay because the armour on Marines covers 90+% of the miniature, so it's worth spending the time there, I think, to get them looking right. Actually, the guy on the left here is probably the one I'm most pleased with. I think that his right leg is pretty perfect. So I wish I'd managed to achieve that across the rest of the model, but got to take your time, right? Now, for the green, I spent ages trying to get the perfect, as it were, Dark Angel's Green. I love Dark Angel's Green contrast, but it didn't work for this. So in the end, I settled on a mixture, a 50-50 mix of Ork Flesh and Karandras Green. In my airbrush, I've thinned this mix. The mix is at least half thinner to half paint. I don't know exactly. I don't measure things particularly well. But you can see on the right, that is one coat of the paint. And on the left, that is 2 coats of the paint. And in the end, I think I went for 4. Again, I'm not trying to achieve anything in one go. I want to use really, really nice translucent see-through layers, which contrast paint provides us with. But they're also a lovely strong colour. So we can see all that black and white that's underneath. And we get a lovely strong green over the top without it being sort of overly desaturated in the shadows. I have a lot of different green Marines on my desk, out of shot here, trying to get the right green. So there you can see the difference those additional coats are making. Again, you've got 6 Marines, so by the time you've done the 6th one, good to go the first coat on the first one. Now, really, really heavy gloss coat on the model. So I've used Vallejo polyurethane gloss, got a massive bottle of it. Use whatever gloss varnish you like. I think I ended up a mixture of about 3 thinner to 1 varnish in my airbrush here. I think I did 4 or 5 coats. So really glossy. You can almost see your face in it. Partly that's going to make it really easy to apply the decals. So I did those at this stage. I'll link a video up in the top all about working with decals. But also I want to do an oil wash, and I want the model really, really glossy for this so that the oil will ideally run into the recesses and stay in the recesses. I'm going to do a thick oil wash here because I want a really opaque, so full strong coverage in those recesses. And I've chosen to use black. I think black is quite dramatic. It works really nice on colours like green and blue and red. So I've gone for a mix here of black Abteilung 502. I'm mixing it with odorless mineral spirits, and you can see I've just about managed to go 50-50 there. So a big blob of the oil, and this mix has done the entire squad with stuff to spare. Roughly 50-50 mix with the thinner. We don't want to do too much thinner, because if we thin it down too much, it will split, and we end up getting a horrible thing. If you need it to be more see-through, you need to use different oils for that. So testing it out on a little bit of sprue here. And that's a touch too thick. And the reason I said that is because it's just stayed where I've put it. So thinned it down with just a handful more drops, so it doesn't break up on me, but it's still a nice opaque mix. And this is just something I think you'll get used to as you use oils more and more. And because of that solvent base to the oils, and because of that really glossy finish on the miniatures, we're getting capillary action. So I mean, the paint is being drawn, sort of sucked into all of the recesses very, very easily off the tip of your brush. Now, I'd suggest using synthetic brushes with oils because the solvents will ruin your natural hair brushes. What I tend to do when a brush is no good for normal painting anymore, it goes into my oil pot, and over time it will get destroyed. But it gets, you get a bit more life out of your brushes as well that way. And it's a case of just taking my time, working my way around the model. I'm not just slopping it all over. I'm working it into the recesses, placing it where I want it. But inevitably, you are going to get it spilling out onto the surfaces, and that's absolutely okay. So it'll look pretty messy, like this guy here. Don't worry about it. We're going to fix that. Nothing, no drama. So I've left it overnight. Come back in the morning, and we can start to fix him up. And to do that, we're going to use a cotton bud, and we're going to use a little bit of the clean mineral spirits. Now, this is a very simple process because that surface is so glossy. the paint's going to struggle to stick to it, which means it will be very easy to remove it. Even so, we're still talking thin layers of paint and varnish because we've applied them with the airbrush. So I'm applying very, very little pressure here as I'm pressing onto the model. So I've wet my Q-tip in a bit of mineral spirits, and I'm gently working it over the area, and it's removing that excess oil paint. Won't take long before the end starts fraying and going a bit manky. Don't be stingy, just get a new one out and work around. Otherwise you end up with loads of these little bits of cotton just stuck to the model. So, you know, it probably took a couple of minutes per model, something like that, to clean it up. And if when you touch the oil, it doesn't come off more or less straight away, just leave it. Leave a little bit of that mineral spirit that's on there because you've touched it with the Q-tip. Work on another area, come back, and it will have softened it and lifted it, so you're able to remove it while still being nice and gentle. If you push on the model too hard, it's nothing to do with solvents here, it's nothing to do with any of that, it's simply abrasion. You push too hard on the model with this, you'll remove paint, but you don't need to be worried. So you see the guy on the left there, we've cleaned up nicely. The guy on the right still needs his clean up, but you see in all those recesses, that lovely dark, black, thick oil paint has given us a ton of sort of additional opacity and contrast. Opacity, the thick black paint in the recesses, so it's not see-through. And then once I was done with all of that, I'm going to give the models a matte varnish because one, paint doesn't stick to gloss stuff very well, like I said, and also these are unbearable to look at the moment and pretty awful to try and film as well. I like to use the Armour MIG varnishes nowadays. I still use that Vallejo gloss because I've got a massive bottle of it, but I've switched all my varnishes over to Armour MIG the last few years. I really like the majority of their products. I wasn't quite sure. I thought I was going to do them red, right? But I know when it changed to 3rd edition, it all got a little bit more grimdark. And we started seeing Dark Angels with silver guns and bolters, and I've done that in the past. It looks fine. But I went back to my Angels of Death Codex. I would say this and the Dwarf Army book from Warhammer Fantasy, 4th edition, maybe the Bretonnian 5th edition one. I would say the most sort of influential books from my first time round in the hobby. I think they're the ones I spent the most time poring over. I thought, yeah, I've basically got to try and do these Marines that I always wanted as a kid and could never quite achieve. So we're going for red weapons. Not trying to, rewrite anything here. I'm just using simple reds that I know work well. So Khorne Red and Mephiston Red, quite boring reds, but I know they got really good coverage. And I'll just start off with Khorne and mix in a bit of Mephiston and work my way up. I'm just trying to get a nice smooth sort of base coat. And then I've gone for the 3rd company markings because that's what's in the codex. And I thought, right, if this is that sort of homage project, it needs to be the guys that are in the codex. And for this, I've used exactly the same. So I'm doing Khorne here initially. It's a nice simple design. And then Mephiston for that little sort of highlight on there. We will come back and do a touch more highlighting later on the models anyway. And then it was a case of blacking out all of the metal areas on the model and all the sort of connective ribbing stuff. I'm not going to do anything more to that connective stuff. It's literally going to be a coat of black paint and then it will get an oil wash later on. Now, onto the leather. So wanted to use a newish leather recipe I came up with. I did a video last week over on Patreon on some of the new Lord of the Rings miniatures. Absolutely adore them. And I went for this more orangey leather on them. And it's a much more involved process on them. But I'm going to use similar colours on these guys because I felt like that orangey leather would look really nice on the against the green armour. Just want to say as well, just a huge thank you to those of you over on Patreon who support us. You're absolutely awesome. You've allowed Andy and I to go full time with this and just produce as much content as we can. So the podcast over here, but you're getting extra videos, extra podcasts, and a bunch of other stuff over on Patreon. So if you do fancy it, consider going and checking it out. If for any reason you can't support us on Patreon, then your likes, your subscribes, your comments on here, they make a huge difference to a channel like ours. It's how the word sort of gets out, and hopefully more people can watch and enjoy and just have a bit more fun with their own painting, which is the goal. You can see here it's just Cygor brown contrast paint that we gradually mix Morfang leather into, keeping that mixture nice and thin all the time. So again, never try and do anything in one go. And we just sort of stipple it on and work our way up to that final very orange highlight on the edges. We know orange and green works well together. So yeah, it's time to do the edge highlighting. It's not everybody's favourite thing to do. I quite enjoy it. I find it quite relaxing, and that's largely because I tend to couple edge highlighting with sort of a little bit of battle damage. And I am keeping these guys deliberately a little bit cleaner, or quite a lot cleaner than I often paint, but still not sort of a pure heavy metal style edge highlighting idea. So I'm just going to effectively tippy-tap chip along the edges. So I'm never trying to worry about getting a perfectly clean single line all the way along. I like the additional sort of ideas of texture and damage that it brings you by doing the little tippy taps. Also is easier, which is, all that matters really when we're doing sort of army painting gaming stuff. In the end here, I've gone for Moot Green mixed in with just a little bit of the Ork Flesh. I've done that simply to give myself the option at the end of the model where if I want to add one more highlight, I can just use that pure Moot Green. But I've always enjoyed Dark Angel's Green armour having that quite bright green edge to it. Then we do exactly the same for the black parts. I've chosen to leave a couple of areas of black on the miniature for armour. I just like how it, like I say, calms things down, breaks things up a little bit. So there's just that bit of detail on their helmets I thought was quite nice to leave black. So just a little grey edge highlight on that one. And then on the red, we've gone for Wildrider Red here. So again, quite a big jump up. But that, that jump in value, it does provide contrast, it does provide interest, it does mean the models, which I hate the word, does help them pop a bit from a distance. So I love doing that. One thing I don't love doing is painting sculpted on effects. I wish I'd removed this, if I'm honest with you, this smoke thing, but it's how the grenade's attached to him, so he's lobbing it. So if I took it off, then I'd have had to have figured out how to put the grenade, otherwise he's just sort of reaching with this bionic arm. So just left the smoke on in the end, and all I've done is put some grey, I think it was Eshin grey, on my palette. Got black, Eshin grey and white, and I just sort of a fairly thin mix, probably 50-50 with water, and I'm sort of just stippling and hashing the paint onto the smoke to give it a bit of painted on texture, and I just slowly start to add more white into the mix and stipple it on fewer areas. I think it looks fine. Say I don't care for sculpted effects. It's not my cup of tea. I think it's very well done. I just don't like it. But actually, this took all of, I don't know, a minute. Probably looks like it too, but for me, it's absolutely fine. I think it's a nice enough effect. I do like sculpted fire, to be fair. I do like flames on minis. I do think that looks pretty cool. But I'm just not down with the spells and the smoke and the stuff like that. Now, other than the armor, there wasn't really a huge area of focus on the models, which is why I've put the vast majority of the effort into that green and the little areas of red. But of course, on the captain, and he was a captain by this point, because I'd given him a backpack with the Iron Halo thing and everything on him. He's got the robes on the model, and initially I was going to go for the sort of tan robes or the sort of paler robes with the purple inner ones, but I'd blacked out the areas of detail, and as I mentioned, I really liked the sort of relief that the areas of black gave the model. And I thought, well, this is mine, right? This is my version of Dark Angels. There'll be lots of people who don't like Dark Angels looking like this, so not worry about them. So I thought, let's leave the majority of his robe black, and then just let's do that sort of tan colour for the internal cassock or whatever. I think it's called cassock, isn't it? The robes in the middle. So it's sort of overcoat robes, as it were. I decided to leave black. And for this, I've chosen a purpley grey as my first highlight. So this is Petroleum Grey by Scale 75. Now, Scale 75 paints, I find, generally don't thin and behave very nicely in the airbrush. So this is one of the few paints that I will add a drop to a flow improve, or flow aid rather, into my mix. So normal airbrush thinner, Vallejo I use at the moment, but Life Colour's the other one I use a lot. It's just whatever my local hobby shop has in stock. And then I put a drop of that fluid in there as well, and that seems to help them behave a bit more. I think it's to do with the matting agents and stuff they use in the scale paints that makes them quite unpleasant to airbrush with. And then the second highlight, I'm just going for Eshin Grey, and this is thinned down, probably 3 drops of thinner to paint, something like that. A thin mix for sure. And I'm confident in my airbrushing that I'm not going to get any really serious overspray. But again, because the paint is so thin, or so dilute rather, if I do get overspray, it probably won't show up. And it's also why I've chosen to do it at this stage of the paint job as well. But the way GW sculpts robes and things, I love it. It's very easy for painters, right? You've got all these dramatic sort of changes of direction and all that, and it's just pretty obvious where to put the highlights if you want to. And then for the tan, keep saying tan. I don't think tan's the right name for this colour at all. But anyway, the light browny robe things that the Dark Angels like doing. I chose to make these deliberately look like a different material to the black cloth. And to do that, I've decided to stipple the paint on. So again, it's a thin mix, probably at least 50-50, if not more water than paint in the mix. Not too much on my brush. And then just nice and slowly and relaxed, just build the layers up. And by doing that, we won't get any real physical texture on the miniature, but we will get a nice sort of painted texture that just suggests, I think a slightly different material. And this will have an impact. You're probably not going to notice it on the table. In the hand, you'll notice it, but also I find it's just a more enjoyable process, and that's why I'm doing it. Now, the biggest homage, probably, other than the red on the weapons casings, was how I was going to do his plasma pistol. So, in the Angels of Death Codex on the Devastator squad, and on he's a last cannon on the Dread, isn't it? But on the Devastator squad, you've got this awesome sort of old school sunburst kind of effect, so yellow through to red on the weapon, and I thought it'd be a shame not to have a little go at that on his pistol. So I grabbed some cling film just to mask the model up with. If you need to mask a painted model, you need to mask a really large area, you don't need to worry about getting loads of tape out. Also, I probably should have mentioned earlier, I blue tacked on the backpacks, and on the Sergeant, I blue tacked on the shoulder pads just to get easier access to various stages of the paint job. So the cling film here will do, or saran wrap, I think you guys call it over in America. That will mask the majority of the model, and then I'll just use a bit of Tamiya tape on the area right next to where I'm going to do the spraying. So you can see I'd already started to do it red, like the normal casings, and I thought to myself, don't be a coward. You're only going to do this once, so might as well enjoy it. So a little bit of white there using the Tamiya white. Then I'm going to use a yellow, orange, and a red contrast paints. You grab the ones you like. The reason I'm using the contrast paints is they go through the airbrush really easy. They're a super powerful colour, and know I can rely on them. And when I'm army painting, it's that reliability is such a huge factor for me. I know before I've applied it what it's going to end up looking like. And it just sort of, I find personally so much of the time I feel is wasted, not wasted, so much of the time that ends up taking longer than I had expected it to with a project is that sort of theory stage, is that wondering how things work. Even before testing it out on the models, just sort of sitting there and pondering it, I always find takes me longer than I think it will. So having these sort of go-to paints or go-to recipes, that's why I've always got my little notebook. I just find so useful. It's also why when manufacturers change their recipes and stuff, it's so frustrating. But it's the way it goes. So peeler off, super simple. Start with a light colour, work down to the dark colour, and yeah, I actually think it looks really fun. I'm really happy with how it came out in the end. I'm actually really happy with how all these guys came out, even though they're not necessarily to my taste. One little extra bit, I'm not going to bother showing you how I've painted every detail on the model, but I did use a purple wash on the gold areas of the armour, just because, again, like with the orange leather we know works well with green, we know that purple works nicely with green as well. So I like to put a purple wash onto my gold if I've sort of got green on the model elsewhere. One other area of the miniature that I had assumed that I was just going to paint metallic, but actually when I came to it, I decided it might look a little bit nicer in a different colour, was the wings. And originally this was just going to be the wings on his helmet, and then I realised he had the wings on his chest, and then I realised he had the wings on the hilt of his, not the hilt, the guard bit on his sword. And I thought, fantastic, there's three. Things in threes we know work nicely anyway. Let's do all of those white. And I haven't actually used a white paint at all. I've just used a sort of dark grey, green-blue colour. I've used coal black here, but you could use something like Inky by Darkness or mix up your own. And then in the end, I just mixed in a pale blue-grey. That's what it's called. I don't know if it's still available. You could use something like Ulthuan Air. That would give you a similar colour. And all it's a case of is just, much like the rest of the model, just mixing the colours in sort of incremental stages and thinning your paint down, at least sort of 50-50, and just slowly building it up. I think patience is probably one of the words I'd use for painting this. As I say, I'm not looking to paint these up to a display standard, but I am looking to paint them up a little bit nicer than I quite often do. when I'm doing these army painting videos. That's just because I don't give myself much time. But I decided to give myself a bit of extra time. So my very understanding family and friends that haven't seen me over this Christmas period meant I was able to get a slightly nicer finish. And that was just a case of a little bit more patience on certain areas in the miniatures, maybe doing 1 or 2 extra sages here and there. But I hope you can see it's still the same paints I would often use. I'm just being a little bit more considered with how I'm applying them. Now for the sword, I really like silver power weapons. So I used a nice sort of neutral bright silver colour, Duraluminium by Vallejo Metal Colour Series. And then here I've used the purple wash that I'd used on the gold. Initially I was just going to sort of tint it with this, but actually I looked at it and I thought, you know what, this is a lovely effect on there. So I decided to use it more deliberately. So this is that Shyish purple contrast paint. And here I'm just going to put a couple of areas of transition into a darker colour on the sword. So 2 on the bottom and then 1 on the top in between those 2 on the bottom. If you'd like to see how to paint power weapons, I'll link a video up in the top. We did it years and years ago, but the theory is still really sound. And it's very similar to what I'm applying on the miniatures here, even though it's a flat colour in that tutorial, not metallic. And actually, I found that the Shyish on its own wasn't quite enough of a contrast, so I've mixed in a dark silver here to that Shyish purple, and then I'm just repeating it. And you can see where the pigment is on the model. I'm just playing around with it and making sure I'm leaving it in the area that I want the darkest. And it took, I don't know, 5 passes, something like that, to get to the effect that I wanted. Yeah, I actually think it came out really nice. I love that little purple hue to the silver. I think it's worked really nicely with the green on the armour. And that white wing thing, as say, giving us that sort of 3 points of that across the model. Then finishing touch, just grab your absolute brightest silver. So again, here we're talking about areas of really dark, areas of really light. That contrast is one of the biggest things that will make a miniature stand out at distance. There are tons of other types of contrast you can work with, but this, I think, is probably the simplest concept of one to work with. And, you know, it does give you very dramatic results. So if you want that more dramatic finish on your models, this is definitely something to consider, is playing around with that sort of contrast of values and stuff. And now it was time for the finishing touches to the model. They're more or less come together. The basing, I've done exactly the same on all my kill team stuff because I want it to look like it fits together. So if you go back and check out the other kill team videos, or you go back and check the original Solar Auxilio video where I've got the full process of basing, you can see how I do it in there. But one of the final steps I've done on all my kill team stuff is to do a sepia wash. So this is just to sort of completely forgotten what word I want to use here. To show a bit of dirt on the miniature. This is an oil wash, so again, I've thinned it down with mineral spirits. We don't need to do any varnishing. It's never going to damage your paintwork underneath as long as that paintwork is dry. It's just a little bit of that over the metals, a few of the recesses, just to show a bit of dirt and grime. I don't think, you know, it's nice. You can play with levels of wear and tear, right? They don't always need to be like the Death Guard guys are. But I think, as we'll see later, these guys fit next to them. They still look like, I think they're in the same sort of universe, even though they're painted I think in quite different styles. So lastly, it's the eye lenses, and I've left these to the very end because I didn't want to put any oil washes over them. I really like how the lenses are presented on these sculpts, these Mark VI head sculpts, and I didn't want to do that classic white dot in the corner eye lens on these guys. I wanted to go for sort of more of a glowy eye in the middle. So we've just gone for a red, orange, yellow mix. The paints I'd used, Khorne Red, because we know it's nice and reliable in the middle. The mid-red is one of our upcoming paints. I just really like it. Something like Evil Sun's Scarlet isn't a million miles away from it. We'll talk more about those paints soon. And then one of the few Chimera colours I use is their warm yellow. It's just because this paint for a yellow is so flipping thick and opaque and strong. It's just, yeah, it's really easy to use. So we just work towards the middle of the eye, little dot, and we're all done. So there we have them, my finished Angels of Death kill team. Well, certainly the first 6 anyway. And if I end up really enjoying playing with them, I'll add a few more operatives in so that I can vary it up a little bit. But I'm really happy with how these guys have come out. They still sit enough in my sort of wheelhouse that I can enjoy looking at them. But I also have thoroughly enjoyed painting a little bit out of my comfort zone, just to keep pushing things and changing things, and, you know, tastes change anyway. But it was really enjoyable having to be a little bit more precise and neat and tidy. I think that's a fault of mine. You know, I'm always rushing these paint jobs for the channel, and sometimes when you rush, you can get a bit sloppy, and I hate that. So it's really nice to just sort of try and relax and focus and be more accurate with everything that I was doing. I think they're a nice homage to that, you know, second ed Angels of Death. The Deathwing Terminators were a need of an earlier edition sort of homage, but Angels of Death, as I say, was certainly my childhood was spent poring over that codex again and again and again. So actually, a really lovely way to finish the year by, you know, doing a project that I wish I could have done as a kid, and now I've got it on my desk and ready to play some games with. I focus very much on the green armor. I think when we're gaming, you know, if you pick a couple of focal points, that's what's going to stand out. Spend the time on them, and then just know when to stop on other areas. There was no point trying to paint everything to the nth degree on these miniatures. There wasn't the time, and also, what's the point if I'm going to be handling them and all the rest of it? So, really nice job on the armor. Spend the time on that, and then to say areas like the metals, that's just your simple metal and a wash, you know, or the black connective stuff, you know, black and then an oil wash, and I think it does absolutely fine. And if anything, I quite like those other areas being a little softer, a bit less dramatic, so that it draws more attention into the areas we want people to look at. So I hope you've enjoyed this video, guys. I hope you've enjoyed the year's worth of videos. I've thoroughly enjoyed doing them for you. I've got so much planned for 2025. I cannot wait to share with you all. If you've got any questions about anything I've done, pop them down in the comments. I'll get back to you as soon as I can. From myself and Andy, we hugely appreciate all the support you guys have given us, and we're going to keep working as hard as we can to bring you more and more painting tutorials to hopefully help you enjoy your painting a little bit more. So take care, and I'll see you next time. If you've liked any of the models in this video and you fancy having an army of them yourself, but perhaps you don't have the time or wherewithal to get it done, consider dropping us an email at commissions@cultofpaint.com, and maybe Ben can sort you out.